Hello, how are you doing? Over the past few weeks here in England, football fever has been sweeping across the country because the Euro Championships are taking place, and now the English team are in the finals of that, which will be played this weekend. And I cannot wait for it to be over because it feels like football has sort of dominated the public conversation over the past month or so, and I just don't personally have any interest in it. I know lots of people do. People get really into it. And a couple years ago, I made this rant video about why can't book prizes be as popular as sports tournaments, and it was a slightly sort of churlish, just sort of fun video because it happened again when I went to get my haircut recently. My hairdresser wanted to talk about the football, and I said, I just don't know anything about it. I don't really have much interest in it, but he insisted on talking about it, and so for half an hour or so, I was forced to sit there and listen to this conversation about the football, which I really didn't want to hear about and had no interest in. And I just sort of feel like there's this public perception that everyone will be interested in discussing it no matter who you are, whereas the same isn't true with book prizes or books, naturally. So, of course, you can be a fan of sports competitions and be a big reader and follow book prizes. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, but, I feel like the public perception is sort of different about expectations about what you'll be interested in. You know what I mean? But anyway, it's going to be over soon, and appropriately enough, on Sunday night when the match is taking place, I'm going to see a drag show, so I'm not going to be watching the sports competition and just have to find out who wins afterwards. Anyway, I have a big group of new books that are just coming out this month and that publishers have kindly sent me and that I'm really interested in reading, so I'm going to go through and talk about a number of these books, and I'd love to know in the comments below if you're interested in reading any of these, or if you have read any of these. Let me know your thoughts about them, and then we can chat about it. But if you want to chat about book competitions as opposed to sports, I'd love to chat about that in the comments below as well. So the first novel I'm going to talk about is Island by Siri, Ranva, Hjelm, Jacobsen. How is that for a name? This is a debut novel which is all about the Faroe Islands and features a woman that goes back to live on the Faroe Islands where her family come from, and it's sort of about the meaning of home and looking at multiple generations of Faroe Island life. And I'm really eager to read this and have a special attraction to this book because the last time I was on an airplane, the last time I went on a journey was to the Faroe Islands. It was over New Year's between 2019 and 2020, over that New Year's, and I went with a group of friends to the Faroe Islands, which, if you don't know, is an archipelago up sort of in the north above Scotland, although it has strong ties with Danish culture. And it's a very rural, quite not very populated place, but very beautiful in this kind of Arctic way. And we saw a glimmer of the Northern Lights when we were there and went out in the middle of the night looking for them. And and it's I'm just sort of interested in reading more about the country and the culture and someone who comes from there. So and I love family sagas. So yeah, I'm really keen to read this. Hollow by B. Catling, which has a really striking cover to it. And this novel is about a group of mercenaries that go on a journey to the Tower of Babel on a sort of mission. And as they are going on this journey, they pass through this landscape that's like a Hieronymus Bosch painting come to life. And if you don't know the work of Hieronymus Bosch, it's this very surreal, trippy, terrifying sort of landscape with all these kind of half demon, half human forms in it, and it's really trippy and really fascinating, and I just love the idea of that kind of painting come to life, and so I think it's a kind of surreal kind of fantasy journey that sounds really imaginative and fun. Other People's Clothes by Calla Henkel, and this is a debut novel, but Calla Henkel is a director and a playwright and an artist, and this novel is about two young American women that moved to Berlin in 2009, and they're sort of a bit adrift in their lives and don't really have any strong purpose, and they get drawn into Berlin nightlife, and they move into an apartment together that is owned by this woman who's a crime writer, and the women start to feel over time that they're being observed by this crime writer to become part of her plot, and they decide to take control of that and throw big parties at this apartment and change the narrative. But then the narrative that they're trying to create gets out of control, and so this sounds like a really enjoyable, thrilling novel, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading it. Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen, and this is a novel about a woman named Gilda, a young woman who gets a job as a receptionist at a church, and she's a lapsed lesbian. She feels like she has to hide her queer identity while working there, and she has an obsession with death and keeps thinking about it all the time. So, but it's meant to be a slightly like comic take on her life. It's described as this novel is described as being for fans of the novel Exciting Times, and I was a big fan of that novel, so yeah, I'm keen to read this too. The Coward by Jared McGinnis, and this is about a man that has a car accident, after which he's in a wheelchair, and because of that he has to move back in with his father that he hasn't lived with for many years. So it's about that uneasy father-son relationship and exploring these ideas of masculinity, but also about life with this disability and going forward, and how his life is sort of falling apart, and he's a compulsive shoplifter, and so yeah, exploring a number of these different issues. My Mess is a Bit of a Life by Georgia Pritchett, which is a brilliant title, and this is a memoir all about the author's life living with anxiety, and a number of different anecdotes about that, but also yeah, about the condition of living with anxiety. And Georgia Pritchett is a writer and a producer on a number of different television shows like Smack the Pony and Veep and Succession, which I love. I mean, I love Veep and Succession, and so Julia Louise-Dreyfus gave a quote for this book where she says, "Georgia Pritchett is a singularly hilarious person. What a magnificent read." And I love Julia Louise-Dreyfus, so yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. Then I have a couple books which are being reprinted and which are both quite short. So the first is In Youth is Pleasure by Denton Welch, and I've always wanted to read this author. I feel sort of guilty. I've never got around to reading him. This novel was first published in 1945. It's about a teenager who doesn't really fit in. He has this strong aesthetic sense, and he doesn't like school, and he just wants to sort of be alone, and I can really relate to that. And this author died when he was only 33 years old. And this is published by Penguin Classics, and it comes with a new introduction by Edmund White. So excited to finally get to reading this author. Then there's the novel Come Closer by Sarah Gran, and this is described as sort of the Yellow Wallpaper meets Rosemary's Baby, because it's about a woman living alone and gets this sort of creeping anxiety about their maybe things in the walls, or there's something like haunting her apartment. So it's the question of whether this is just happening in her mind, or are these horrific things really occurring. And I love that sort of tension. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. Ceremony of Innocence by Madeleine Bunting. And the story of this novel begins when a journalist goes missing in Egypt, and the investigation into what happened to this journalist leads back to the story of a diplomat in 1969 in Tehran that seeks lucrative opportunities in the Gulf region, and whose family becomes very wealthy, and it's the question of where that wealth came from. So yeah, it's looking at the legacy of politics in the Gulf region, but also opportunists who took advantage of the tumultuous politics of the time for their own financial gain. Madeleine. The Paper Palace by Miranda, Cowley, Heller, and this is a debut novel that I was really keen on reading because Claire Fuller highly recommended it, and also it takes place on Cape Cod. So I've started reading it. I'm about 80 pages into it, and I'm really enjoying it. It's about a woman who's a wife and a mother who wakes up one day, and it follows her over the course of the day after it's soon revealed that she had an affair with a longtime friend of hers the evening before, and so it follows in the day following that, but also looking back on her life and her family's history and how they came to own this property and the whole history behind it and the secrets of the family. And yeah, I'm just really enjoying it as this very atmospheric story, which has a very clever structure to it of going through the course of this day while then flashing back to the past and the history of this family. Wild Pets by Amber Medland. This is another debut novel about 3 recent graduates that moved to New York City to start their lives there. One's a writer, one's a musician, and one becomes involved with an older academic. So it's a kind of coming of age type novel in sort of young adulthood and exploring that whole experience, which I really enjoy reading about. The Painter's Friend by Howard Cunnell, and this is a novel about a man who's around 60 years old and is an aspiring artist and thinks that he's going to have his first big break, which doesn't work out, and so he retreats to living on this island with a number of other people that are sort of misfits and don't really fit in with mainstream society, and so finds a life for himself there and a sort of support network with friends there, but a man wants to develop this island into becoming more prosperous, and so it's the conflict between the people that live there and the aspirations of the developer, and so yeah, it sort of explores art in that way. I'm interested in reading this because Bob the Booker was talking about it on his YouTube channel recently, and he said he really enjoyed it, even though it wasn't a perfect book, but yeah, I thought that it was really worth reading. So yeah, and this is an author I've been wanting to read before. So yeah, I'm hoping to get to this. The Service by Frankie Miren, and this is about 3 different women that are either involved in prostitution themselves or on reporting about it, and so it's looking at the question of sex work in the modern world from a number of different angles, and I think it's a really interesting question. And the author is really involved in this issue. So I think it sounds like a really intriguing novel. I Get Loud by David Ouimet, and this is a sequel to the book I Go Quiet, which is a really beautiful, touching story about an introverted girl that's very quiet and about sort of living in the world as that type of personality. And so this is like a children's book, and I don't normally read children's books, but it's a sort of subject that I really sympathize with, and so this follows the girl's story going forward and finding a friend for the first time and about that whole experience, and just has really lovely illustrations along with this very touching story about introverted personalities. From Women to the World, and this is edited by Elizabeth Filippouli, and this is a whole collection of letters by a number of different women, including writers and politicians and leaders in their field, writing letters to women from the past, to women in the present, or just general groups of women, discussing what it means to be a woman in the world today, and feminism, and all those issues. And so I think it sounds like a really fascinating way to approach this subject, rather than just a collection of essays of people writing about this subject, of really directed letters talking about this issue with other women. And it includes a letter from Elif Shafak, the great writer, and so I'm looking forward to diving into this. And then I have a couple of crime novels, and normally I'm not very interested in crime fiction, but I just read Lucy Ellmann's new collection of essays, and in that she has another rant about crime writers, and she got into a bit of trouble for this and was criticized for her opinion opinions about crime writers and crime writing. And so I think would be interesting to read a couple of crime novels that are written by women to see what they sort of do with this genre. So first off, there's Pretty as a Picture by Elizabeth Little, and this is a novel about a female film editor who gets hired on this project with a famous male director, and the strange going-ons that happen on the set of this as they're making a film about this crime, but the subject of the crime and the murderer might still be on the loose, and so it's sort of that following that tension. So it sounds like a thrilling and twisty story. Then there is Dream Girl by Laura Lippman, and this is about a man that's unwell and is confined to a bed. The only contact he has with other people is with his nurse and his personal assistant, but he starts getting phone calls, these strange phone calls from a girl who doesn't actually exist, who's someone that he's made up in a book that he's written. And so it's the question of like, who are these phone calls coming from? Is it this kind of supernatural thing, or is he sort of being terrorized for a particular reason? And so yeah, sounds like quite a thrilling, inventive story. So I think it'd be fun to try. So those are all the books I'm going to talk about. Yeah, like I said, let me know in the comments below if you're keen on any of these, if you're interested in any of them, or if you've read them yourself. And but I hope you're reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.